found your niche with automotive art. Where did that come from? Where did that start with you? Where you're like, I'm going to design cars and do different things to cars, and you use the term transformative, and it really is. Your art is transformative. Where did that begin?
My love for cars really started with my father. And he was the one who sort of, got me interested in cars and pointed out, his love for design. And he's grew up in Germany, and so we were very lucky to be able to take a look at the European cars when we were young and traveled.
So where did you talk about your love of cars coming from your father? Were you always into art? Because people ask me about this, what I do. Our morning show is sports, and then here on our after hour show, we talk about everything. Um, and that's been my whole life. Were you always into art, like from your
Yes.
early
Oh,
days, drawing, coloring, and
that's a great question. My mother used to say that I was born with a crayon in my left hand, so I was probably predisposed to being an artist.
so okay. So when it comes to your automotive art, um, what are some of the things that you're most proud of? You talked about some you're dealing with cars and some of your stories. What are some of the things, the installations that you know y- really you look at and you're like, wow, I can't believe I did that.
Well, so I like to say that my art, if I've done it properly, is part eye candy, part history lesson, and part hide and seek. So you can always, hopefully they're beautiful and fun to look at. And then hopefully, they impart some type of knowledge. And there's always a surprise in them. So I've done some pretty crazy things to share car stories. I've dragged a canvas 1,000 miles through the desert
Oh
to
wow.
imbue it and ingrain it with the silt that the area is known for during the Nora 1000. I have submerged a canvas in a Swiss lake to tell the story of a Bugatti that was sunken for 75 years. And I buried a canvas in Bordeaux, France, to tell the story of an actual sports car that was hidden from the Nazis after they had invaded France. So the idea is to come up with these really interesting things that have people lean into the story and ask, well, why did you do that? And by doing that, they learn and the story lives on.
That's amazing. Okay, so where do you get your research? Like that's interesting where you're able to get these vehicles and then be able to tell this story in such a distinct manner, because looking at your art, it's very not only colorful, creative, but everything is different. Like you don't replicate, which is impressive. Like a lot of time with artists, you can tell their style. This is their thing. You are very intricate and detailed and different from one piece to the next.
Well, that's a very good question. You know what? I think what I do is 50% of my time is spent researching the vehicle.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so what happens is I let that research drive my narrative. And so, for example, for the first car that Porsche ever designed in a wind tunnel, I was like, that's really an impressive story about this particular vehicle. It was a Porsche 906. And I had seen, they brought out for me to look at the original wind tunnel model that they made. And it was really interesting because it wasn't full size, it was a model, and it was made like Jenga. It was cut up in pieces, and the Germans were brilliant. You could push a piece out if you didn't like the way that it was formed and redesign just that one piece. And I thought that really affected me when I saw that. So I thought, well, how do I share that story? And so what we did was we built a wind tunnel. We put an exact replica of the car in the wind tunnel. We stuffed the chambers of the wind tunnel with a very fine pigmented a powder, and blew it over the shape of the car. And at the back end, I literally captured the shape that the wind made from this car. And that was the back end of that particular vehicle. So what happens is I come up with, one important idea after researching, and I let that drive my narrative. For the Porsche 917, which is arguably one of the greatest race cars of all time, a lot of people don't know this story, but it was terribly uncontrollable. In fact, at its first outing in Le Mans, a privateer on his very first lap crashed and died. And they wanted to figure out what is wrong with this car. The works drivers even refused to drive it because it tended to wander on the track. And 200 some miles an hour, it's pretty scary to be wandering on a track. Had a tendency to wander on, particularly the straights when it was going fast at Le Mans. So they took it to this track in Austria, and the chief engineer, they had hired Weyer's team to kind of figure this all out. And John Horsman noticed that as the car went around and it came back into the pit, it had dead insects everywhere on the car but the rear wing. And he immediately knew that it had to be an aerodynamic problem and not chassis flex or suspension geometry. So he takes out some snips and duct tape of all things and sheets of aluminum, and he refashions the back end. And the next morning, the car goes out and it is 5 seconds faster, which is equivalent to 50 horsepower. That's crazy nuts. The car goes on to become one of the greatest race cars of all time. It wins Le Mans in 70 and 71, becomes the feature of, Steve McQueen's fabulous movie, Le Mans. Well, most people had never heard that story about the insects. Now, I'm sure Porsche wasn't proud of the fact that somebody else, figured it out. But John Horsman wrote about it in his book. Unfortunately, a lot of people did not read his book. So in 2016, when I had heard that story, I was like, I got to share this. How do I do it? So what I did was I created a 917 out of insects. I used butterflies because, gnats would have been a very difficult thing. I would have had millions of gnats. So I did it out of butterflies and other insects. I used entomology pins and pinned them to create this car. The tail end of the car was made out of Jay Gelatti's book, Golf 917, which shares that story. And so when you look at my pieces, you can usually gain some information. It's a stunning piece, and people always ask, why insects? Why butterflies? And then they learn the story.
How long, and again, we're talking with Heidi Mraz, website, HeidiMraz.com, great on the socials, at Heidi.Mraz on Instagram and at Heidi Mraz Art on Twitter. How long does something like that take?
They take some time. A lot of the pieces are commissioned, and gathering information and talking to anybody who's had reference with the car, that does take several months. And then I will photograph. I usually, because typically they are commissions, I'll have the chance to photograph the car. And so I'll take thousands of photographs for every single detail you can imagine, from bits of even from the carpet to the engine compartment to all the nuts on the bolt, everything is photographed. And then I have that as a reference, and they can be included in my pieces. Most of my pieces are assemblages, and they are made out of the history, the provenance, who owned it, did it appear in any tabloids or books. All of that information I try to incorporate in it. So what you end up with is this lasting retrospect of a single car and all the lives and the culture and everything it touched, up to the date that it's finished.
I'm always curious when we talk about artists, whether it's entertainment or when it comes to art, what they have in the future, because it feels like you've gone to a lot of different areas. What are some of the things you haven't done that you are looking to possibly accomplish?
That's a very good question. I like car stories, so I love it when people come and tell me a great car story, because that's always inspiring as far as what's next. My most recent series I'm really excited about. It's called Driven to Abstraction, and actually you can see one of the pieces behind me. It's designed to be very abstract and modern looking. So if it's hung in your house, you may not necessarily know that it's automotive art. And then there's an unlocking mechanism, which is either a rear view mirror, convex rear view mirror. You can actually do it with your phone or step away from it to a distance, and this hidden car is revealed. And it's really exciting to be able to share that with people and to see their reactions. I also have another series that's called Pedal to the Metal, and that is a series that looks like, at first glance, vintage botanical print. But when you step closer, you realize that it's really automotive art. And that came about because I had a client who said to me, Heidi, I would love to commission you to do more art, but my wife will not allow me to have any automotive art in the house.
Oh, wow.
And so that was my inspiration for Pedal to the Metal, and actually a part of this new series as well, because it's sort of a play where you don't 100% know that it's automotive art, but at the same time, it is all automotive art.
And again, people can find you at HeidiMraz.com. Is there any locations, events in the future that people can see you in person, see what you're doing?
As of right now, so this next month I will be at the Royal Automobile Club in London, which
Oh,
I'm very
wow.
excited to be part of the Guild of Motoring Artists. And I just was back from Sotheby's in London, which was fabulous, and Sleeping with Art also in the UK. And right now I just finished up at a motorcar cavalcade, and I may be at the finish line at Le Mans for
Oh, wow.
celebrating their 100th year anniversary. So there's some things coming up. I'd love for you guys to follow me on Instagram. That's probably the best way to see what I'm doing, and check out my website. I appreciate it. And that's where I update, where I'm going to be and when I'm going to be.
Well, and before we go, let me ask you, because it's funny. My wife's a digital marketing manager, owns a business, so she's always on me to do socials, and I have my love-hate relationship with it. I have to think that social media has actually been great for the artist, because that's what people's favorite thing is, just looking at stuff.
Yes.
So the fact that you're actually creating it, and if you actually can go through the process, and some of these reels that people
Share
do,
it.
it's
Yeah.
got to be great. Social media's actually got to be great for the artist. It's got to be a way to get things out in a way that you couldn't before.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really wonderful because you can show your process if you want to. You can share where you're going, and it's instantaneous. With websites, you have to understand how to manipulate them and then update them. But social media is instant. You know.
To follow her, she's great in social media world. If anyone's worth watching, it's Heidi Mraz. Heidi, thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we get to talk to you again later and talk about some of the other automotive projects you have.
I appreciate it. Thanks for letting me be here.
Thank you so much. That was Heidi Mraz, and she is an automotive artist, which is friggin' cool. And it's interesting when you get people on, you never know where it's going to go. That was entertaining and interesting, and her process is amazing. And the fact that she not only does these art installations and art pieces, but that they have a story, and then she actually does that much research before actually doing the art, which is a lot of the time artists just go. And the fact that she does research and then just goes is wonderful. So I really appreciate her time, and appreciate you for tuning in. Check us out each and every morning on the Devo Show with Lubie on South Florida Live. Check us out, our South Florida content, the 5 Reasons Sports Network, and After Hours, Devo and Lubie here on the Believe Network as well. For the absent Devo, I am Mike Lubie Lubitz. No matter what's going on in your sports world, your art world, your daily life, you gotta believe.